In 1765, there was a tree in Boston. It was a real tree. And they called it the Tree of Liberty. The Sons of Liberty, when they were still this revolutionary underground group, used to meet there, used to plot and plan. They used to hang tax collectors in effigy from the Tree of Liberty. Well, then the British Loyalists got wind of this, and they tarred and feathered some of those revolutionaries under the Tree of Liberty. And then what they did was they actually cut down the Tree of Liberty, the British Loyalists, and they used it as firewood. You know what that did? That further enraged the revolutionaries to the point where Sons of Liberty groups started spreading across the country, across the colonies. They began to erect these liberty poles because they didn't all have trees, right? And this liberty tree represented the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the natural rights of man. And so what happened was they realized they weren't going to get any further with negotiating with Britain. So they wrote this letter. It's a Dear John letter. Maybe you've received one before. It's a breakup letter to the British government. And they say, you know what? This Declaration of Independence, we have tried every solution and it's failed. So you know what? We're nullifying this relationship right now. The king didn't really like that. So he sends over an army. And a ragtag bunch of revolutionaries nullified the most powerful military force on the face of the earth. And what they did was they said, you know what? We want to establish a government that would protect this tree of liberty. We're going to replant the tree of liberty, the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we're going to establish government as the protector so that every individual would not be denied access to the Tree of Liberty. And no group could stand there and deny access to another group to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So what happened? What happened that the protector of the liberties of man has turned and begun to hack away at the roots and branches of the Tree of Liberty? What happened? Well, I think today I want to identify what I think are three enemies of liberty. And the first enemy of liberty that the founders understood and realized was government itself. They had a healthy skepticism of this thing called government. Thomas Jefferson said, people question whether man can rule himself, but have we found angels in the form of kings that can rule over us? Let history be the judge. He said, you know what? This is not about taking power and handing it off to the federal government. What this is about setting up a constitution that is specific and narrow in its purpose, that will prevent the federal government from turning and hacking away at the roots and branches. But government itself is this entity that it naturally grows. Thomas Jefferson said, liberty has this way of waning and tyranny has this way of growing. And so government itself has become the enemy of liberty over time. And it's interesting, I just saw this in USA Today, talks about USA's credit limit maxed out. What's interesting is this maxing out of the credit limit didn't start, it doesn't say when Obama took office, it says 2002, $6.4 trillion. And that the credit cap was raised 10 times since then. Some of that happened under a time when Republicans controlled the House and the Senate and the presidency. You see, the enemies of liberty do not just have D's next to their name. There is exactly. Okay, so this crowd understands that on November 2nd, things aren't going to be all better. Right? There is a big government with an R next to its name and a big government with a D next to its name. And that's never going to change. In fact, the Republicans are the ones who they pushed through the largest expansion of government health care, and the Democrats almost shut it down before Obamacare. Do we get that? Okay, so the Republicans are many times the enemies of liberty. And so right now, I used to be a pastor. And when you're in the ministry, sometimes people give deathbed confessions. And you're very happy when they happen, but you're also very skeptical. And the Republican Party was dead in 2008, people. Just look at the corpse John McCain they tried to pass off as a candidate. And listen, we have a lot of born-again fiscal conservatives out there right now, don't we? And they have learned how to talk Tea Party with the best of them, all right? But we would be wise to take a page from the Founders Playbook that says, you know, show me your works, not your words. We don't trust you. And so we've got a watchful eye on you. Government is an enemy of liberty. But there is another enemy of liberty, and it's complacency. And the thing is the founders said, you know, typically liberty is destroyed not overnight, through a slow encroachment of tyranny. And you know what? We can look over our shoulder and we can see how it was just little by little. Thomas Jefferson even recognized, only 30 years after the Constitution, he says, the Supreme Court is working day and night to undermine our liberties. It started right off the bat. And it happened slowly. And really, in the last 2 years, I think we've been done a great favor. Because when it happens quickly, people begin to pay attention. And it begins to energize the movement. But the fact of the matter is this, is many times apathy and complacency comes from a lack of knowledge, but it also comes because people don't think they can make a difference. We can make a difference. It's time that we start to make a difference, and you being here proves that you're ready to stop being complacent. Complacency destroys liberty, but there is another enemy, and that enemy is fear. And you know what happened? In the wake of 9/11, when this country was afraid, our government trotted out legislation that had been sitting in the wings. They didn't write it overnight. They didn't read it. And they passed it through, Republicans and Democrats, called the Patriot Act. And listen, that act is not a friend of liberty, people. It has destroyed many of our rights in the Bill of Rights. Benjamin Franklin said, if you're going to trade liberty for safety, you deserve neither. They understood that fear has always been used to try to get the people to cower and look to governments and say, please save us, please rescue us with another law. That is not the path of freedom. Are we finding that out? We are. And so fear does not enlarge liberty. And so these three enemies of liberty need to be destroyed. We need to destroy them. Now, I'm not saying we have to destroy government, because George Washington said government is like fire. It's a dangerous servant, but a fearful master. And so he says, look, government in its tamest form is dangerous, and it's the servant of the people. Listen, I have news for you if you haven't realized this yet. We rule in America. We are the bosses. We are the employer. And so government was to be our servant, and we were to be in control of that. And through the enemies of liberty and complacency and fear and all these things, we've let that go. And now it's become a fearful master. And Patrick Henry said, look, it will come to dominate your lives and interests if you allow that to happen. And so government can exist, but it has to be put in its proper place. Nullification is a way to do that. States' rights is a vehicle to do that. Nullification is like a lost tool that's been around for a long time that has just recently been dusted off, and we're like blowing off the dust. And states around the country are starting to say, hey, do you think we could actually use this? This is crazy enough, it just might work. And so finding a way to try to put the federal government back in its place and bring some of that power back to the hands of the local people. And so one of the things that I'm doing, and this is where I start into a little bit of a commercial, is I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to education. Let me ask you something. There's a 12-year-old in here. I know that, and that's excellent. How many people in here are under 30? Not many. And let me tell you something. The under 30 crowd, unless they're already part of the choir that we're preaching to, aren't coming to 6-hour seminars on a Saturday. That is the future of this movement. And there is a lot of activity going on in the youth. There's a lot of it. But liberty has not been the message they've been gravitating to over time. And so one of our things that we're doing, we're concentrating on at the Foundation for a Free Society, because what we believe is that the actual foundation of a free society, the building blocks, are individuals who understand their rights, the proper role of government, and are empowered to assert those rights. And so we want to go out there and educate people under 35 specifically, on the proper role of government, on what their natural rights are, and empower them to use them. We're trying to do this in a number of ways. You know, like I said, they're not going to come to these seminars, but the internet, viral video. I mean, how many people in here know what Facebook and Twitter is? You know there's 500 million people worldwide on Facebook and 28 million people on this thing called Twitter? Let me tell you something, you don't have to learn how to use it, but these tools can be used to engage people in conversation. 3-minute videos that are interesting, engaging, funny about these topics will be watched. You know why? Because they're not sitting in front of their computers and doing it. Most young people are getting their information off of these things. And so this is the way, this is the future. We have to communicate with the next generation in their language. And listen, I'm not calling all of you to go out there and evangelize the young people necessarily. I'm saying let's empower people in their own generation to do it. Let's give them the education. Let's give them the tools. Let's get them to not be complacent. Because many times young people are complacent because they don't think they can make a difference. They don't think there's anything they can do. They lack knowledge. They don't really understand where they stand. One of the things that we're doing is we have this campaign called Let Freedom Click. We're trying to make the concepts of liberty click in the minds of people who don't even think about it. And we're trying to engage them in a very easy way to say, hey, what do you really believe about these issues? It's one of the things we're doing. We're producing videos. We just launched an FM radio station, or radio show in Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas is not the conservative bastion of America, people. Because we're not just trying to reach conservatives. We're trying to reach people on both sides of the aisle. Listen, the enemy isn't the liberal next door. People want to be free. People want to have the right to live their own lives. Liberals love freedom. Most liberals do, trust me. I talk to them all the time. It's the people at the top. It's the Nancy Pelosi's. We're not going to reach her. Don't worry about it. She's a lost cause, okay? And the other thing is fear. That's the other enemy. And this is the thing. You know what the government fears? Thomas Jefferson said, maybe somebody knows this quote, but when the people fear the government, there's tyranny. When the government fears the people, there's liberty. And so what needs to happen in order for us not to be afraid? And the government is fearful of an irate, tireless minority. But you know what they fear more? An irate, tireless majority. Look, we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of places you can give your money. I know that. What I want to do is I want to invite you to be able to support liberty, to educate and change the youth of this country, and get a tax deduction while you're at it. How about that? So there are some forms here that I've passed around. I just want to get pledges today. That's all I want to do. I don't want your credit card number today. But I want you to say, look, I'll give $5 a month to support this cause. I'll give $50 right now to support this cause because it's important. And that's what we're going to do. I wanted to say, by way of side note, I wrote a book. I have 15 copies here, so anyone who gives me a $50 pledge, I'll follow up with you for it. I'll give you a free book. And I just want to say, look, it's an investment in the future. And it's an investment of liberty. And unlike Washington, we consider the finances of people a stewardship. You know, the youth of America, they don't have a lot of money, but they're eager to learn. And so it's going to take the over 35 to finance the education of the youth. So that's my commercial today. I thank you for coming out.